Why Christians shouldn't make black and white stories. First, let's talk about the problem with Christian art. If you grew up in the church like I did, you've probably seen it. One, Christian movies, where the hero is pure, flawless, or a saint, or maybe they're in the middle of a broken situation, but how they handle it is completely perfect. And then there's a very clear villain that is obvious, sometimes cartoonish, is labeled a sinner and is sinning. And then there's Christian novels where unbelievers are wicked until they magically pray and become perfect, or similarly, Christians are kind of these sinless characters. Or Christian music. And sometimes Christian music only talks about victory and never about struggle. Jesus said, "In this world we will have trouble, but take heart, I have overcome the world." So we know we'll have trouble, and we know that it's not going to be perfect. We're also saved by grace. Here's the problem. That's not how life works. Most of life is lived in the gray area. Most of faith is messy. Most of the Bible is R-rated. Yet, many Christian artists feel pressured to create overly simplistic art, black and white stories, as if showing moral complexity somehow makes a story less Christian. But what if our stories should reflect the actual struggles and failures that we live day in, day out, and raw realities of faith? What if the best way to reach people is not through preachy messages, but through honest, gritty, raw, real storytelling? Let's break this down. So number one, Jesus used complex, messy stories. His sermons were made up of a lot of parables. And yes, he did get down to the nitty-gritty of things, and he was very blunt. But he was a storyteller. If preachy black and white stories were the best way to teach truth, he would have done this and preached that way all of the time, because we know he was perfect. He lived a perfect life, and he's the only person, fully man, who's ever done that. That's what we believe. Instead, he told stories, and his stories were raw. They weren't safe for the whole family. They dealt with greed, betrayal, sexual sin, hypocrisy. He even overturned stereotypes, and they were full of violence. The prodigal son, Luke 15:11 through 32, a rebellious son squanders his family inheritance, basically telling his father, I wish you were dead, and so I can have my inheritance now while you're still living. And he spent it on prostitutes and wild living. He ends up in absolute filth, sleeping with the pigs before finally coming home. But the good son, he's eaten up with self-righteousness and resentment. There's no neat ending. It's just tension, grace, and a father who welcomes the sinner. The Good Samaritan, Luke 10:25 through 37. Jesus flips the societal expectations upside down. The hero of the story isn't a religious leader, it's a despised Samaritan. People expected a simple lesson: love your neighbor. But instead, Jesus forced them to wrestle with their biases. The rich young ruler. Now, the rich young ruler, Mark 10:17 through 27, Jesus doesn't tell the man, you're good or bad. He gives him a challenge. He gives him a challenge the rich man cannot accept, and the rich man walks away brokenhearted. He also challenged the stereotype at the time that said, and Jews regularly believed, that when you're wealthy, you're blessed by God. And he turns it on its head, that whole notion, by saying to the rich man, it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than it is for a rich man to enter heaven, because he knew where the rich man's heart was. The rich man's heart was not fully focused on God. He loved treasures on earth more. So Jesus' stories are messy, and real faith is messy. But he never shied away from these harsh truths, from tension, failure, and moral complexity. So why do we do that? Number 2, life is gray, so our stories should be too, once we're above an appropriate age. Jones, a Hollywood actor and someone I had the pleasure of meeting with, said, "I don't want to be overt about my faith, but I also don't want to hide it. I just want to be honest." And that's the key. When he was in the position to say yes or no to Hellboy, he initially, before even reading the script, was like, "I have to say no to this. I'll just do it kindly to Guillermo I'm so sorry I butchered your name, Guillermo del Toro." But once he read the script, you know what? I'll just show the clip. Here it is.
As an actor, a young actor starting out, horror films are offered a lot. I mean, there's a lot of them being made. And when you're an unknown actor, there's a lot of low budget horror films that don't have the budget for big names, so you have more of a chance to get into those. And so early in my career, I said yes to a couple that I probably wouldn't say yes to now. But now I don't just say no blindly. Let's use Hellboy as an example. When I was offered the first Hellboy movie, Guillermo del Toro came looking for me after we'd done Mimic together a few years before that. He gave me a script for the movie and a stack of Hellboy comics. I'm thinking, oh gosh, it's so sweet of him to come looking for me, but I'm going to have to formulate a great answer of why I can't do this movie. And when I called him later that night and said, after reading this script as a Christian boy, why is a story that has a demon as the centerpiece not offensive to me at all? It's like, in fact, it's actually kind of uplifting. He said that it's really a story about unhooking your past and living for good, upstanding morals. And he said, who better to embody that than a demon from hell? All of us carry our past around like a piano hook to us. It's like dragging it. So at some point you can go cut that cord and let it go. That's what forgiveness is all about.
And that's the key. Most Christians and books struggle because we try to be too overt. We try to directly tell the audience what's right or wrong. We turn every story into a sermon instead of just being real, human, and giving them the human experience. But life isn't neatly packaged into a sermon. We have to use critical thinking in life, just like I think we should use critical thinking when we watch movies or read books and generally take in stories. And guess what? The Bible doesn't do this either. The Bible is full of R-rated stories. If the Bible were a movie, it would be rated R. If it fully showed everything that happened, it'd be probably rated X, XXX, for violence, betrayal, sex, gut-wrenching failure, guts, lots of sex. It's definitely more R-rated than the Game of Thrones. David, 2 Samuel 11:12, a man after God's own heart committed adultery with Bathsheba and murdered her husband. And this was supposed to be a man after God's own heart. Like, what? That doesn't make any sense, right? Because then a prophet came and told him afterwards, this was a sin. And he also used a story to tell him that. Samson, Judges 13-16, a man gifted with supernatural strength who visited prostitutes got blinded after his reckless choices. Tamar and Judah, Genesis 38, a woman who dresses as a prostitute to trick her father-in-law into getting her pregnant because he refused to honor his word. Lot and his daughters, Genesis 19:30-38. After escaping Sodom, Lot's daughters got him drunk and slept with him to have children. The Levite's concubine, Judges 19, trigger warning, a woman is abused and left for dead, and her husband dismembers her body to send a message. This isn't clean. This isn't preachy black and white storytelling, and this is the Bible. This is a real broken world. David repented and God still used him. Samuel's final act was a victory for God's people. Tamar's bloodline leads to Jesus. Judah, despite his failure, becomes a key tribe of Israel. And the Bible doesn't sanitize sin. It didn't leave it out. All of the disciples were very clear in their writings and honest about all of their weaknesses, boasting in Christ. We know Paul killed many, many Christians before he became one. The Bible doesn't sanitize sin and sugarcoat human nature. It represents people as they are, and it shows how God works through and in the mess. Number 3, preachy stories don't work, but powerful stories do. C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien understood this. Lewis once said, "We don't need more Christian books. We need more Christian writers." The problem isn't that Christians are making movies, books, and music. That's not the problem. The problem is that we are making too many preachy, unrealistic ones, and it's just not good art. It's not excellent. And remember, do all things as if working for the Lord. It should bring about the most excellent art. Think about Da Vinci. Think about Galileo. All of these people were great artists, but they challenged beliefs and they promoted critical thinking through art and through science, through critical thinking, through logic. J.R.R. Tolkien didn't write Lord of the Rings as a Christian sermon, yet there are so many complex analogies in it. He wrote deep, complex, and rich stories, but ones that were steeped in Christian truth. Good versus evil, even the magic in his stories were not just labeled good or evil. And yes, even good characters struggled with temptation. Frodo succumbs to the ring's power. Was there victory in his stories? Yes, but only after pain, suffering, and immense losses. Hope? Yes, but it comes through scars and with scars. And the truth was already woven into the story. And in fact, we listen more to stories that are well done rather than just preached at and submitted on a gold platter. 4, how Christians should approach storytelling. If you're a Christian artist, whether you're a writer, filmmaker, or musician, here is what to keep in mind. Number 1, tell the truth, not a sermon. Jesus told stories that made people think. Critical thinking. He promoted logic. The first word for God in the Bible in Genesis was logos, and that's from Greek translated into logic. God created logical thinking. Jesus didn't spoon feed lessons. Number 2, embrace moral complexity. The Bible's filled with flawed people, deep struggles, and painful failures. Your stories should be too. Number 3, let God's truth be woven in, not pushed in, and definitely not preached in. And by preached, I mean overtly, like here's the right and wrong. Preaching is obviously fine. Number 4, create real characters with real struggles. Perfect Christians are non-existent. Christians aren't perfect, and you know what? That's just not relatable. Show faith through doubt, pain, and struggle. Number 5, trust that God speaks through your story. Now here's just the power of real, honest storytelling. If God didn't sanitize the Bible, why do we try to sanitize our stories? Yes, there are moral boundaries, and yes, we should not do things that would overtly cause others to stumble. Yes, but faith is messy, life is messy, and stories that are not put on a gold platter, that promote critical thinking, that are excellent and well done, are needed by Christians. And life is gray. Life is lived in the gray. People are flawed, but in the mess, God is there. Jesus is no more just within the church than he is with the person cleaning the windows. Jesus is no more with the church clergy than with the Christian on the mission field. Jesus is no more with the Christian on the mission field than he is with the janitor cleaning out the trash. Jesus is no more with the Billy Graham than he is with a woman who is praying to get out of an abusive relationship, or the man praying to get out of the abusive relationship. In the mess, God is there. And that, more than any black and white messages, is the most powerful story that we can ever tell. Now go tell it. Stay mainstay.